Guilt is one of the most powerful emotions humans experience, not because it is loud, but because it is intimate. Fear warns you about danger outside. Guilt turns inward. It speaks in your own voice. It does not shout, it whispers. And because it feels personal, guilt is often mistaken for morality. People believe guilt means they are doing the right thing, that it keeps them accountable, that it makes them good. But guilt is not the same as conscience. It is a psychological response shaped by social expectations, emotional conditioning, and the fear of rejection. And when left unchecked, guilt becomes one of the most effective tools for control. From a young age, guilt is taught long before it is understood. Children learn quickly that approval follows obedience, and that disappointment follows resistance. A sad look, a sigh, silence. These signals require no punishment. They require no explanation. The child feels responsible without knowing why. Over time, the brain learns to associate love with compliance and withdrawal with wrongdoing. Guilt becomes automatic. It does not require reflection. It activates the moment boundaries are tested. And because guilt is learned in relationships, it is most powerful within them. Unlike fear, which prepares the body for action, guilt immobilizes. It creates a need to repair, to apologize, to submit. The brain treats guilt as a threat to belonging. And belonging is survival. Humans are wired to avoid exclusion. When guilt appears, the mind does not ask whether the accusation is fair. It asks how to restore connection as quickly as possible. This is why guilt is so effective at overriding reason. Logic can wait. Relief cannot. Guilt thrives in ambiguity. It rarely comes with clear evidence. Instead, it appears as a feeling of having done something wrong, even when no rule has been broken. People feel guilty for resting, for saying no, for choosing themselves, for wanting more. This is because guilt is not about actions alone. It is about expectations, unspoken expectations, cultural expectations, emotional expectations. And because many of these expectations are invisible, guilt becomes impossible to fully resolve. One of the most dangerous forms of guilt is responsibility guilt. The belief that you are responsible for other people's emotions, their disappointment, their discomfort, their unhappiness. This belief forms early and deepens over time. People begin to monitor the emotional states of others and adjust their behavior accordingly, not out of kindness, but out of fear of guilt. This is how guilt turns empathy into self-erasure. Caring becomes obligation. Obligation becomes resentment. And resentment becomes silence. Guilt is especially powerful because it disguises itself as virtue. People who feel guilty often believe they are being moral, considerate, or self-aware. But guilt does not require understanding. It requires compliance. True morality involves choice. Guilt removes choice by making disobedience feel emotionally unbearable. When people act out of guilt, they are not choosing what they believe is right. They are choosing what relieves discomfort. In relationships, guilt becomes a currency, sometimes deliberately, sometimes unconsciously. A partner who says, "After everything I've done for you," is not asking for understanding. They are activating guilt. A parent who says, "I guess I'm just a bad parent then," is not expressing vulnerability. They are shifting responsibility. These statements do not invite dialogue. They end it. Guilt shuts down conversation by framing disagreement as cruelty. What makes guilt particularly effective is that it feels self-generated. Unlike fear, which often comes from external threats, guilt feels internal. It feels like your own judgment. But guilt is rarely born in isolation. It is shaped by patterns of reinforcement. Who withdrew affection when you asserted yourself? Who rewarded sacrifice and ignored boundaries? Over time, the brain internalizes these patterns and begins enforcing them automatically. No one needs to pressure you anymore. You pressure yourself. Guilt also distorts memory. It highlights moments of perceived failure and minimizes moments of self-respect. People replay conversations searching for what they did wrong, rather than whether they were treated unfairly. This mental rehearsal strengthens guilt and weakens confidence. The mind becomes a courtroom where the verdict is always guilty and the defense is never heard. One of the most overlooked aspects of guilt is how it shapes identity. People begin to define themselves by their usefulness to others, their reliability, their willingness to sacrifice. Saying no feels like betrayal. Rest feels selfish. Distance feels cruel. Over time, guilt stops responding to behavior and starts policing existence. People feel guilty for wanting different lives, different relationships, different versions of themselves. Guilt does not disappear when it is obeyed. It reinforces itself. Each time guilt dictates a decision, the brain learns that guilt is an authority worth listening to. The threshold lowers. Guilt activates faster, lasts longer, and demands more. What began as a signal becomes a system, and that system quietly governs behavior. The tragedy of guilt is not that it exists. It is that it replaces clarity. Guilt confuses responsibility with control. It convinces people that suffering is proof of goodness, that endurance equals love, that boundaries are harm. But guilt does not measure morality. It measures conditioning. Guilt will always be present in social life. It helps regulate behavior and maintain trust. But when guilt becomes chronic, automatic, and unquestioned, it stops protecting relationships and starts controlling them. The most important question is not whether you feel guilty. The question is who benefits from your guilt. Because guilt does not ask whether something is fair. It asks whether you will comply. This is the psychology code.